We're going up and down, over and over, over and over. It's the same old thing. Up and down, over and under.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Dr. Kashdan. Excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, same here. Good to be here.
So I was just telling you a little bit before we started. I had the pleasure of reading your most recent book, The Art of Insubordination: How to Dissent and Defy Effectively. And what I was telling you was like very interesting, number one, but number two, like very sorely needed in today's environment.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's walking around and saying we have so much moral courage, so much intellectual courage right now for people standing up to really absurd ideas that we don't need any guidebooks whatsoever. And we have, let's put people into coal mines and start fly fishing because we got enough characters out there who are whistleblowers and breaking things down.
Well, and even if like I would say a lot of people would probably feel that there's no shortage of like quote unquote rebels at the moment. I think the question is like, are those rebels doing things effectively in a way that's actually moving us forward? And that's one of the things that I found so enjoyable about this book. Like it really is kind of almost a guidebook. It's, you know, in my opinion, it felt like, hey, look, if you're passionate, if you see an area that is like ripe for change, you know, there's a right way to go about this. Like there's a way to make that change happen that's going to be hopefully effective, long lasting, and isn't going to be so disruptive that it's going to completely throw the status quo out the window and throw us into anarchy.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, we're not talking about rebels. We're not talking about rebellions. We're talking about how do we catalyze a better future that's more utopian than what we have right now. And so as you were describing that, it seems as if we have a lot of rebels. I would say we have a lot of people that are signaling to a lot of other people that we are good tribe members and we are saying the right thing and doing the right thing. We don't even care about the thing. We're just trying to solidify our group membership. That's what I see when I see a lot of people who are talking and speaking, taking up a lot of airtime.
So there's this idea of like virtue signaling.
Yeah, So avoiding that term because it's been overused is what I want to help people do is also recognize, are you doing something that is central to cherished interests of what you care about? Or is it that you don't even recognize that you have non-consciously absorbed the interests of a faction that you are part of or you're aspiring to be part of?
Yeah. And that's incumbent upon the individual to do a lot of reflection, a lot of deep digging.
Yeah, I mean, I also think there's a lot of responsibility to go around. I mean, what I think about the media is it'd be really nice as opposed to doing the story of the day that shows what's ridiculous about people who are progressive, what's ridiculous about people that are conservative is, hey, this portfolio of beliefs. Why do people hold this entire portfolio as opposed to thinking a la carte and saying, I like this one, not that one, this one I could care less about? You know, there are meta comments that are missing in the narrative because they don't sell newspapers and they don't sell, you know, screen shares for a news station. But it's incumbent on authors and people that are studying this to say, it doesn't make sense that you would have a 90% agreement with anybody in your political party. I mean, it's just the nature of being a very unique individual in society.
So that's something that's always blown my mind. And there's plenty of places to go for political talk. And so this show is often not one of them, but I've always felt it makes no sense to me that, you know, to only have two political parties and to align so strictly to one as if that party's encompasses like all of your opinions and beliefs on like such a diverse, wide array of topics. And for that reason, I've always just found like people, it seems to just blindly grab on to the views of a faction rather. And just kind of take that as like, you know what? Yeah, I'm just going to cheer for this team kind of no matter what. And that to me has just always made no sense.
Yeah. So pulling it away from politics, I would say this is that when I teach my college classes, I tell my students, if you agree with everything that I say over the course of a single class, that tells me you're not paying attention. It tells me you're not synthesizing ideas. And if a leader of an organization has a bunch of people that are agreeing with them over the course of an entire 90-minute meeting, I would say something is wrong in your culture where people aren't speaking up, or they're not spending enough time reflecting and incubating about their own opinions, and that's problematic. So the way I view it is just a very simple, non-scientifically proven mantra is I look for 80% approval. And once it's higher than 80%, I will say something culturally is something's wrong here, is that either we're not taking enough time to kind of sit with these ideas, or you're trying to appease me, or there's some level of self-censorship that I want to obliterate a little bit more in this system so that more ideas and more voices come out. And I would like other people to consider that mantra as opposed to the sort of the dopamine hit you get when people agree with you, like you, and tell you that you're smart so much.
So, I've got a bunch of questions for you, but maybe we can go down this road a little bit. So why is it so important that someone or some percentage of the group is like dissenting from like the common held consensus?
Yeah, there's this neglected researcher, Charlotte Nemeth, who's about to retire or is retired. My book to some degree is an ode to other scientists. And she has this real nice body of work of showing there's 3 real benefits of having someone in the mix who disagrees with you. And they're disagreeing with you, as Ken, as you said, it's because of principled reasons, not to showcase that they're intelligent, smart, or they're one-upping you.
Sure.
So one of them is that even if the dissenter is completely off base, like freaking nonsense that they're spouting, they introduce the idea, they break the third wall and say, oh, other ideas are possible to inject, other decisions are possible that we can consider before deciding what the solution is going to be. And so, for example, like if you and I were talking about how do we create the next generation of amazing Olympic athletes, and you say, hey, is there something, everyone always talks about high altitude running, but what about like in space? What about like bringing them into the interstellar space station? I mean, just the best cream of the crop. Could that actually ramp them up? No one's thought about this idea, but just the notion of, if we're talking about gravity affecting your physical performance, then as soon as you bring that, even though if biologically it actually makes your knees and your joints weaker, which we know that, and you're wrong. Now that you said that, it's like, yeah, what about like dropping people off in the middle of the ocean? Like, what about people, what about bringing people into planes? And all of a sudden it opens up this window of divergent thinking, even if you're stupid with your idea.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, because it's very easy to kind of operate within the confines of, again, say the status quo, but like, what is commonly practiced or accepted. And I could see how it's like, hey, if you kind of blow the top off that, it's like all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait, all right, that may have been in its own right like an idea that is like crazy or not worth pursuing, but like, wow, it's like maybe there's something else in the middle there that could push the boundaries of what we're currently doing that we haven't explored yet.
Yeah. So one thing that I do with a lot of my work is when everyone gets really excited about a topic, I always think of, well, it probably doesn't work all the time. So when mindfulness was the big hit in psychology, and everybody's still writing mindfulness for poker and mindfulness for fine dining. And I was like, if mindfulness was so good for the human psyche, why wouldn't we be having the state more often with 1.5 million years of evolution? So we ended up, Robert Biswas-Diener and I wrote a long book chapter about the benefits of mindlessness. And you find that it's actually very beneficial. And there's this really cool study showing that when people that are overweight, which I don't know if that's a microaggression in 2022, but they're overweight and they are.
It'll sound terrible 2 years from now, I guarantee you, no matter what.
Sure. Yeah.
Even if it's appropriate today.
Exactly. Yeah. And so they are paired up with either a peer or someone that's much older, like over 75 years of age. And when they're with the peer, those peers tend to hold back their thoughts. So what they think about, they write about, are very indicative with what they actually say to the person. They're not telling them the truth. So the conversation is about weight and exercise. Now, the older adults who are over 75, they're like truth tellers. They're just like, listen, kid, you got to exercise. You're going to have heart attacks. You're going to have strokes. You're not going to have a romantic partner. Just look at yourself. Now, here's what's interesting. It doesn't feel good to have that conversation with the truth teller, the straight speaker. But when they're asked, hey, who do you want to spend time with again? who gave you wisdom? Like, who was the most valuable person that you'd want in your social circle? Invariably, those overweight students prefer the person that was the straight talking older adult and not their peer. And there's something to be said about it goes back to the courage deficit, is we need people that are truth tellers, but let's just focus on how to be a good messenger so that you get a receptive audience.
It's so interesting because that brings to mind so many examples just in my own life of, some of like, if we move this to athletics just a little bit, like when I think about some of the coaches that impacted my life, certainly some of the most memorable ones were probably falling in that truth telling camp. And I think, one of the people, and if Tom Royce is listening, I mean, he's one of my favorite people on the planet, my JV basketball coach in high school. I mean, opposing teams' parents would be, sometimes they would come up to us after the game and be like, I'm so sorry, like, you poor kids, because he was so loud.
Right.
And he was so demanding. What they didn't realize is he was also the most positive, supportive, but he demanded your very best every time. And from the outside looking in, you're like, whew, I do not want to play for that guy. But if you played for him, I almost think to a man, every kid was like, I will run through a wall for this guy.
This is what they say about Bob Knight. You've got, I don't know what the percentage is, but I read a lot of narratives about Bob Knight at Indiana University as the basketball. He was the guy, if people don't know, that was throwing metal chairs across the court just for no reason, just because he was pissed off at his own player. And he got in a lot of trouble because I think he physically slapped or pushed one of his own players.
Yeah, there's a little choke involved. Yeah. He was
but Ken, as you're saying, the large majority of narratives that I've read are ones that, like, listen, he was physically intimidating. He was emotionally intimidating, but he made me a better human being, and he made me a better parent, a better friend, a better athlete that happened there. And there's something sociologically where we have closed off that window of someone that's a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more emotionally intense, a little bit more in your face. And I would argue that we have a generation that is psychologically weaker than prior generations because we do not have these tests of fortitude of being around an adult who really does care about you, but their, for lack of a better word, love language is expressions of, I'm going to point out all your weaknesses, I'm going to make you stronger, and you're going to hate me during the process. That sounds good, but most parents and caregivers would say, now that I'm looking at it, I want to pull them out and bring them in with the positive coach. And I would argue is that there's something about the 40, especially if you have peers that are going through it with you. So one-on-one, that's a challenging endeavor. But if you're sort of going through this gauntlet of pain with other people, there's also the social bonding that is so much stronger as a team and just as having friends and allies that cannot be replicated by a purely positive Ted Lasso kind of coach.
Well, and it's funny, two things there that come to mind. Number one, if anyone wants to see what this looks like, I feel like the movie Miracle and Remember the Titans do an incredible job of demonstrating like how a tough, hard-nosed, unrelenting coach, if nothing else, can like bring the team together because they're going through that shared experience. And I think anyone who's like lived through that can probably relate. But so I have 3 kids. My daughter's 7, my son's 4, and my youngest son is 2.5. And so it's been one of like the greatest pleasures of my role as a father, being able to coach them. And as an example, so my daughter's 7, she plays on a team 7 through 9. They're at that age where they're starting to really kind of pick it up. And the 9-year-olds, I mean, they're sharp. They're fully functional people, like. And I've even like noticed in the way that I communicate with them, I'm like, ooh, like, am I, I know how I want to coach them. I'm like, but am I creating a situation where I'm going to have a mom come and talk to me after practice because I'm being too hard on their kid? There's so many things that like is running in the back of my mind about how I'm coaching them. And it's influenced by like what I'm kind of just seeing in like kind of like the social tenor right now. It's like, hey, it's like, you can only give such strict feedback. You have to interact with like women in a specific way. It's kind of crazy. And so I've kind of been wrestling with like, well, am I just thinking about this because they are very young, and they are, and like, how am I going to handle this when they do get a little older and they really need real coaching and feedback? Like, how am I going to approach that?
Yeah, so I have a little bit older. I've got twin 15-year-olds that play travel soccer and high school soccer and volleyball,
Okay.
and a 9-year-old. So they've gone through several coaches. I've witnessed this. There's a few interesting elements of this. And there's so many angles about kind of the parent over involvement in sports, and it also mimics in the school place as well. The amount of parents that call the school because their kid got a C, or
Right.
they got penalized for missing an assignment. But we compare our insides to other people's outsides. And where that comes into play is we are perseverating about thin slices of behavior that we're seeing in coaches and teachers and schools. And what we're not attentive to, because we don't have access to, is what's
Hmm.
happening behind the scenes when we're not there. And we shouldn't be there. We shouldn't be at the schools, and we shouldn't be at the playing fields during practice. And what you see in the games is the reflection of dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of hours that are hiding behind the scenes. And so when people freak out of like, why are you yelling at my kid? They don't know that their relationship with your kid might be very diametrical to your relationship with your kid, as it should be. You've
Right.
outsourced. And so I've had my kids over the years oscillate between saying, I don't like this coach and I can't work with them, they're too intense. And then later, as they get older, saying, that was the best, as you were saying, Ken, that was the best coach I
Hmm.
had. Now, my coach, I don't even trust their comments because they're so positive all the time. And they never mention my weaknesses. And I can do a laundry list of all the things I have to work on. I wish I had that guy again in the past. And so thinking about these retrospectives of athletes can
Hmm.
help us inform how we view
Oh, that's a great
these
point.
coaches of younger kids in today's society.
No, I love that. Well, and one of the things too, and again, I don't know how much you know about my background, but I played football in college. Um, and so I keep kind of trying to remind myself, it's like, I'm not doing them any favors by either not correcting them or not providing them like the discipline and the structure needed to actually like develop. Right. Because to your point, like my role in that situation is like I'm the coach. Like I'm there. It's been outsourced to me for like that hour to help get them better at softball. Right. And have fun and learn all the great things that sports delivers. And so I kind of remind myself, I'm like, well, don't shortchange the kids either. Right. Like don't go so soft on them. Like they're a lot stronger than you think. And at some point, like the world is not going to be so kind to them. So it's almost like you're cutting your legs out from underneath them if you don't like give them exposure in small doses to what it looks like to deal with, to some extent, adversity. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's kind of like what's been going through
Yeah,
my head.
there's a quote that I stole from George W. Bush in the book, which is the bigotry of low expectations, and
Hmm.
he talked about it from racial dynamics, but I think we should consider this everywhere. And there's a lot of science to show that when you have schools that are predominantly white and you have minority students that are in there racially,
Yeah.
is that one of the ways where you increase the performance level of minority students is not to give them extra time on test, less homework. It's basically is that when you give them feedback on a paper, they experimentally test this, and some people they said, listen, great job. Other people they got feedback that said, listen, I like the way that you're writing. If you did this, this, and this, that would really bring out your potential. So you're pointing
Hmm.
out and those kids that got the constructive critical feedback, they performed better and they were more likely to do extra credit assignments than the people that got positive feedback. So this is a
Interesting.
very interesting commentary on society with data, which is that when we use kid gloves and we decide prematurely that you are weak, vulnerable because of your demographics, because of your life history, because of what you look like. And that could be physically, and that could be kind of or just like your how you walk
Yeah.
through the world. If we assume weakness and treat them with weakness, we are actually limiting their potential. But there's another end of that, which kind of your thought remind me of,
Hmm.
is that one of the things that makes a great coach is that you start to understand the variability in the students or the athletes that you're working with to know that how can I resource you? What are your needs and how can I
Right.
match those? And those things might be so subtle that an observer cannot pick up that you gave them a hug, you rubbed the top of their head when they came off the field. You whispered something in the ear, and what you whispered to one kid might be, listen, you're a freaking machine. Like, go kill those kids that are on the other side. Or you might be whispering to another kid, listen, your compassion and your love for your team and your players is what makes you amazing. Don't let anybody change you. And so what you whisper to every kid's ears, in their ears, nobody gets access to that. And and what coaches might not even be aware that they are completely personalizing everything that they're doing to the players. And that's what makes an exceptional coach. Like the higher level element of the coaches, you might be on a 7 on a 0 to 10 point scale of aggressiveness, but that's on average. What it doesn't say is you vary between extreme compassion and extreme intensity depending on the player.
So that just reminded me, gosh, I wish I could remember his book. It's Pete Carroll's book, and this is maybe like 6-7 years old. But one of the things that stood out for me from that book was he talked about how one of the biggest epiphanies that he had was when he realized that like each player learned differently and that each player needed to be communicated to differently to like maximize that player's potential, right? Like if you're focused on like, how do I get the most out of this player so they can contribute to the team? I need to address their needs uniquely. And this is a little anecdotal, but one story that he told was he had a guy at USC, absolute stud. He was a fullback. And he had just learned that like this guy does not respond well to yelling. Not that he shuts down, but he's like, he doesn't have to do that. You could communicate what he needs to do to him in a calm way. He'll retain it and then he'll go and execute. And he had this one moment where he missed an assignment, fullback ran off the field, and Pete Carroll starts screaming at him. And the fullback looked at him. He was like, why are you yelling at me? Pete Carroll's kind of like, what? He's like, just tell me what I did and I'll do it different next time. He's like, oh yeah. He's like, well, yeah, I'm sorry. Like you missed your, so it was just this really cool kind of story at the highest level. And at that time, a team that, perennial national champions. And I don't know if there's a much better example of a guy who's been able to get every ounce of effort and talent out of his players, whether it be in college or the NFL.
I mean, probably Phil Jackson is the next forefather after him. I mean, I remember when what got me into college was doing shot put, and
no way.
So I don't know if there's a visual here, if people could see me, but I was a $150 when I was in high school. So I would go up against the linemen and the linebackers who just kind of, all right, I'll just do track in the off season when I'm not doing football. And so my coach knew that the greatest motivation for me was basically to make me very competitive and piss me off. And he would regularly, he didn't tell me until after I graduated high school. He's like, I would always tell you, listen, the other coach was commenting like, why is your shot putter so small? They're so gangly. And like, look how small his legs are. Like there's no way he can compete with my shot putters. So he would say this to me like minutes before I went into the circle, throwing this 12 to 16 pound metal ball. And that strategy always worked for me. Now, would it have worked for Anad Ragunath, who was the other shot putter? Definitely not. Like he needed a hug. He needed a pat on the back. It's not that either one of us is better or worse. It's what is the motivational system that operates? What's your operating system? And you need to know it as an individual. And as a coach, you need to access that operating system of those individuals. And this goes for, it's not, sports is just a metaphor for life. It goes for when you're coaching, it goes for when you're leading, it goes for when you're a parent, it goes for when you're a teacher, and it goes for just being a good citizen is when you see people, running amiss in a grocery store and mistreating a cashier, to figure out like, what do you do in that situation? Do you sit back and be a bystander, or do you be an upstander and go do something? And if you're going to do something and protect the cashier, how do you do it so that you don't end up with a warfare, a physical altercation in the middle of a supermarket? So all of these strategies starts with being very situationally aware and very attentive to, all right, what is my quick psychological read of what's going to motivate this individual?
Maybe that's a good segue too. So one of the things that I loved about your book, and maybe we could even start by having you define, what would you define principled insubordination as?
Well, to some degree, it is the willingness to see and respond to dysfunctional ideas, processes, and norms in a group, in your life, or in society. And you're trying to make a change despite lacking power and status to do so. So this is really about when you lack power and status, you're not the CEO. You're not the coach of the sport of the athletic team. You're a kid, and your family is kind of acting, really strange on Thanksgiving with all their kind of political nightmare conversations. And then in these scenarios, what is the best way to influence, persuade, and get the best possible outcome? And so the principled part is this is the act of dissent or defiance comes from a place, from an ethical framework that you're trying to do good for yourself. And if you do good for yourself, it doesn't detract from other people's well-being, or to do good for society.
So, one of the things that kind of kept coming to mind as I was reading this book. So I love history. Most people would be probably surprised to hear that I was a history major and ended up working in tech. But I'm fascinated by some of these American history, historical figures. So I just got done reading Trudeau's book on Washington. One of my favorite book is his one on Grant. And one of the things that kept coming to mind as I was reading your kind of, it almost kind of reads like a guide. It's like, look, if you're passionate, you want to change the world, like there's a way to do it, right? At least that's kind of how I read it. And I kept reflecting back on some of these historical figures who were in incredibly adverse situations and the way in which they navigated getting to their end destination. One of the things I loved about Washington is he was a master of understanding how to like read people, create change, but like all the while, like keep himself out of the fray. And like ultimately it took a long time navigate to his end goal, but know when to push, when to pull, and very strategic in how he got to his end destination versus someone who might've been in a similar situation and just, the pressure cooker just finally and the lid blew off and they got angry. Like he had a mastery of his emotions and it was just so strategic. And I was like, oh my God, like if this book had been around, in his time, like, he probably either would have been the case study or like he would have been reading this thing religiously.
I appreciate the compliment. I mean, this is the way that I view this is a lot of activists right now are getting it wrong, and they're driven by, I want immediate feedback and I want immediate responsiveness versus I'm going to play the long game. And I mean, this is a very simple version, but when I watch racial reckoning, when I watch climate change, when I watch people that are actually thinking about, okay, should we change like the election process, and when I watch about LGBTQIA plus rights, and I listen to how people, and I observe how people are doing it now, and I'm like, wow, there's so many ways where you're creating unnecessary detractors and unnecessary friction because you're going for speed and shaming and public shaming and lynching. And those strategies, if you go, Ken, I mean, you majored in history. I did not. I just read books. I mean, if you go to Teddy Roosevelt, if you go to the gay liberation movement in the 1970s, if you go to Napoleon and how he was able to kind of bring France to primacy in the world, go to Genghis Khan, go to Malcolm X, go to Martin Luther King Jr. None of these people accomplished things without really deep skin in the game and a lot of cuts and bruises and a lot of difficulty over the course of months and years in some cases. And really the shortest social revolution that exists is gay marriage. And that was a 10-year process. And and the thing is, I think about it, if you went back to the beginning of the decision of should we push for gay marriage, the legalization of gay marriage? And I know some of your listeners will have different views on this, but it's really just an analog.
Yeah, as an example. Yeah.
Yeah. If let's imagine that it started today, 2022, you know exactly what would happen and it would go awry. It would go on social media. People would be posting that, like, they would be posting a bunch of pictures of heterosexual couples that are problematic. They'd show pictures of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard and say, listen, this is the heterosexual world. We're better than you. And they have pictures of restaurants that we're not going to go to because they were upset because, we were holding hands. And how are we ever going to get married when a restaurant will let us have us there? And they would say, boycott this restaurant. Boycott this person, like don't go to this establishment, like camp in front of this senator's house and this congressman's house. And all of that is great for your tribe. But if you're trying to win the affection and you're trying to actually curry additional votes to make sure that gay marriage was to pass, I don't know if it would in 2022. And one of the ways that it worked, if you go back 10 years ago, is nobody in the beginning talked about policy. All people did was very playfully, in many cases, in online forums and in public places, is hold. I remember there's these great photographs where they've got gay men and women holding protest signs that say, "We just want to get divorced just like you." And just that playful
I think I've
strategy
seen that. Yeah.
is something that sarcasm and humor and that like the really biting satire in there, it's something that you don't see. But what it did was people that were against gay marriage and really homophobic at the time were like, you know what? That's a good point. Like, we're not doing so well on the heterosexual side as well. And you don't see that level of strategic detail in terms of how do I win the hearts and minds of emotions? And it's going to be slow because they have to go against their friends and family of these deep, almost intractable beliefs. And you have to be able to get that perspective of it takes a lot to go against the people that have been on your side and say, you know what, I'm kind of going to go on to the other side. There's a lot of social persecution that happens there. And if we don't have that compassion of how difficult it is to switch sides, we're going to have a hard time winning other people to be, additional allies to the cause.
It's always interesting. Like when I have these conversations, they start to intersect. And I don't know in what order these are going to come out. So listeners might be like, we haven't heard that episode yet. But I just got done interviewing a gentleman by the name of Justin Wren, and he founded the Fight for the Forgotten charity, which is really cool. He's like a former UFC fighter, but he does a ton of work over in Africa. And one of the things that they're doing is they're trying to help basically like an endangered people in Uganda, the pygmies. They're trying to help like build some level of infrastructure, get them access to clean water, education, all these things. And so on the other side of that, there are those who are in power and literal slave masters. And so one of the things that, and this is someone who has been on the ground, I think it's 10 plus years, made a tremendous amount of change and lasting impact, is he said, if we went and basically tried to solve their problems in isolation and didn't take into consideration the other side, and we continue to dehumanize the people who are committing these atrocities, he's like, nothing would ever get done, or it would get done and it would fall apart as soon as we left. He's like, the way that we've been able to be impactful is that we have gone in and we've helped get buy-in from the other side, those persecuting, as to how this is going to improve them as well. And I don't want to give away the whole episode, but I was just like, oh, wow, like that's such like a profound realization, and it just completely in line with what you said. It's like, it doesn't benefit you just to be loud and to take jabs at the other side. It's like, if you're really invested in making change, what I'm hearing is like, you need to find a way strategically to get through to the other side, because that role of converting over to support you is also difficult, right or wrong.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that example. And you can imagine if you didn't dehumanize the other side, your group members would say, "Are you really one of us, or are you kind of like are you intel? Are you a spy that's really for the other side?" And you get that skepticism and that the little bit of paranoia that happens there. If you were to win whatever your social cause is. So let's say you win climate change and all of a sudden, now it's all going to be electrical powered everything, especially cars. Well, what I don't hear in the conversation is all of these really well-meaning families that aren't on social media, just trying to make ends meet, that are in, auto manufacturing companies. What's your thought about them? Because they're still going to be part of the society. So now that they don't have jobs, are you willing to actually spend some of your capital to help them retool? And maybe they don't want to retool, maybe they're too old to retool. That happens there. Right. So other than giving them buyouts, I mean, because that doesn't help either, because this is the source of meaning. They take great pride in creating these, in American cars that they've been doing for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. That happens there. And when you think about trying to end coal mines because of the element that has in the environment. Well, I don't hear much compassion for, well, what do we do with these entire towns that revolve around the coal mine? And so it's more of like, let's not worry about them. Let's not let them drag down future generations of what's going to happen to Earth. And I would say, yes, but you can also include them in your welfare about humanity and know that this is all they've ever known. Like, you can't blame them, and they've worked their butt off. And they've developed cancer and illnesses and injuries as a result of working in these coal mines. And because of that, the trains are running. Because the trains are running, we got to have cars and motorcycles and planes. And, they're part of the evolution of humanity. And so I think if of the many, many strategies that are out there, one is go get the perspective of your potential adversaries, try to understand them, and realize is that they're still going to be alive and there if you win. So let's work with them now. And this isn't just about votes. It starts with, I'm going to care for you under this tent and figure out what your life would be like if there were no coal mines, if Detroit wasn't the center capital of creating gas guzzling cars. And these are not the conversations that I'm hearing about when I hear about we want to improve climate change. And and irrespective of whether this is a cause that I'm for, it's that this is just basically a model to approach social change.
Yeah, it's one of the most frustrating things to me is always like the lack of thought beyond the surface level issue. I mean, look, the true, it is just as true in like intercompany politics, right? Like, I have seen people who are great employees basically run themselves out of the company because they could not figure out how to kind of play the long game and be strategic in how they kind of like further their own agenda, right? Whether it be personal raise, a project, direction that the company's going. It's like, it's not enough to just be loud and signal that you're upset about something. Like, again, I don't know how I ended up talking so much about history on this episode, but like Abraham Lincoln, right? Like, there's incredible examples of his understanding that like, look, I can't disrupt everything at once. This is a very long game and it's going to be a meandering path and I'm going to have to give a lot on the way to this end destination. But in doing so, ultimately, like, we can get close to our desired outcome, but you're going to have to be willing to be thoughtful and sacrifice along the way because there's someone on the other side who has a different point of view that we eventually need to win over. So I don't know. I'm just fascinated by this conversation.
Can I add an element to the Abraham Lincoln story?
Please.
That gets lost. All right. So this gets lost in the mix. Abraham Lincoln is known. So I'm using language from the 1800s here. He was known as being incredibly great at doing darky jokes. And Abraham Lincoln would often tell what is now, from our perspective, which we really shouldn't be doing, from our moral lens, he had really good racist jokes, really good racist stories. And when he wanted to get the civil rights movement and kind of abolish slavery, you can bet your butt that when he met with people in the South, he would use those jokes and use those stories to let them know, listen, I understand you. I'm one of you. And still, I know that, listen, as you were saying, we as a union are going to be better if we abolish slavery, because we're going to have more people that pay more taxes and more people that produce more goods that happen there. But don't be mistaken. This guy was very strategic, and he knew that if he came in there as morally superior and saying, like, listen, don't say that around me. Like, hey, make sure you don't tweet that. Like, that's inappropriate. I don't like that you supported this versus that. No. He sat with them, drank with them, broke bread with them, and he played in their conversations and was just as inappropriate as the deepest, like, malevolent Southerner who hated Black people at the time. And here's the thing: in 2022, if this was happening right now, the civil rights and kind of slavery was still happening. We're talking about abolishing slavery. Could an Abraham Lincoln survive with that strategy? And I would say probably not. And that's problematic because that's what led to the abolishment of slavery.
Yeah, it just makes me feel like compromise is messy. And it's like, to your point, if you are going to stand on a platform of just 100% virtue and you're unwilling to waver from that stance at any point, like, you're going to have a really difficult time connecting with people. And I almost feel like the recurring theme of this conversation is like, there's someone on the other side that we need to account for, and in some way you need to like be able to bridge that divide. And in some way it's like you have to be able to like establish a relationship with those people. And so, sometimes I'm trying to think of what the word is. Maybe it's calculating. Sometimes I'm like, man, am I just being kind of calculating and a little cold, and almost like too strategic and trying to like further my own objective? But I'm like, no, I mean, that's what it takes.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
if you have something that you're trying to move forward, it's like, it requires a level of, strategy, I guess is the word that I keep coming back to.
So the term that we've been studying for years and kind of was basically the thesis of my last book, The Upside of Your Dark Side, was there's a benefit for a little bit of narcissism, a little bit of selfishness, a little bit of psychopathy. And this makes people very uncomfortable. It's
manipulation. That's the word I was looking for.
And manipulate. Yeah,
manipulate.
Well, listen, we're all manipulating people. Every time that you give a heart to someone on social media and saying that you like that thing, and it's someone that is socially attractive or popular, you are doing a form of manipulation. You're engaging in kindness as a strategy to curry favor, to win favor, or maybe you're tagging them in inside post you have because you want to kind of be connected with them, and you know that their power and status will rub off on you. So let's not pretend that we're not all playing likability games here and power structure games. The question is, are we doing it under an ethical framework for do the means justify the ends? And in some cases, we are constraining the flexible repertoire that someone can have to create positive, healthy gains for individuals, families, and societies. Because as you're saying, we want everyone to be virtuous 100% of the time. And that's not humanity. That's not how humans operate in social groups.
Yeah, it's not possible. Well, and maybe we could do this too, because I feel like we've started. Could we talk about some of the other kind of like foundational principles that you would say kind of define, principled insubordination? Or I also love this term, like virtuous rebels.
Yeah. And I really, let me give a more mundane example, because we've been talking about politics and sports has been great. Let's just say that you wanted to, you found your romantic partner and you wanted to settle down. You decided like you're a fan of marriage, but you kind of like your space and you feel like to keep the passion alive, you want to live in different places and not live together. This is in 2022. We can have any possible way of forming a relationship. So there's these social norms that you live with your long-term monogamous romantic partner. But who says so? And why can't we be flexible? And why can't we have a deep, honest conversation about maybe that's not the best strategy, especially if both of you have kids and you're kind of mixing families? Maybe the best mix is not living at the Brady Bunch in one single household, but in two households. And
I know two families immediately come to mind that I know.
It's great. It's good.
One of which with kids, one of which without. They live in different cities and they've been together, I don't know how many years at this point, 8. But no, please continue. I didn't mean to cut you off. I know them.
So to me, this fits with an archetype of reading history and sociology and psychology, which I call the niche carver. And this is basically of you are living a life that deviates from orthodox thinking because it is better for your personal fulfillment. It's better for you reaching your potential, and it does not detract from other people's well-being. And so you think of like people in van life, this kind of became very big during the pandemic, of people of like, listen, why should I have one stable location? Because I love to travel, I love meeting new people, and I love new food. And a lot of people look down at this as like, listen, this is what kids do. Like when they're doing their cross-country trip when they're in college, you don't do it as an adult. Well, what makes an adult? Right. So you can just start asking these questions, this curiosity and this intellectual humility. And why is there only one way of being an adult? Like, do you stop using profanity? Do you stop listening to heavy metal music? Do you stop wrestling with your friends when you see them? And I mean, I have this, this is, one of the origins of being interested in this line of work is these very constrained ideas of what's an adult? What's a romantic relationship? Like, what's your relationship have to be with your family? Can you make your own family with no blood? whatsoever, because you get along with them better, and there's actually more trust, and there's actually more security that happens there. And then in terms of your own psychological self-care, how weird can you get? I mean, for some, to go back to Phil Jackson running the Bulls. One of the coolest episodes of The Last Dance, the really amazing documentary, was the Dennis Rodman episode, where Phil Jackson was asked when Dennis Rodman disappeared without any mention, and disappeared for Vegas for it was weeks, but no one knew when he was going to come back. The media attacked Phil Jackson and said, "Hey, what are you doing as a coach?" And he said something like this, which is, listen, Dennis Rodman, for whatever reason, he needs to go to Vegas, drink excessively, be around lots of women, and then he's going to come back when he's ready, and he's going to be the amazing player that we have. To do that,
so incredible.
To give that level of psychological space, to be so astutely observant of what this guy needed. I mean, that is such a masterful documentary that every organizational leader, every person in politics should be watching that, because to what degree do you get close to that individual difference mentality? Because if he made Dennis Rodman come back, he'd be disgruntled, he'd be aggressive, and he probably would actually be giving only a small fraction of his performance when he was on the court.
Yeah. That's such an incredible example and such a good documentary if people haven't watched it. You said something else in there too, and this is something I definitely wanted to ask you about because it really kind of struck a chord with me. Curiosity kept popping up in this book, and I know it's one of the core tenets of your wellness lab at George Mason. Can you talk about, and I know now we're kind of like jumping around a little bit, but can you talk about why curiosity is, and if it is a critical component of just like personal well-being?
Yeah. I mean, I forgot her name. Sophie von Strum wrote an article. She talks about the 3 pillars of achievement. And I know that a lot of your listeners of your podcast are interested in achievement. And
yeah, just a little bit. Yeah.
So the three rungs are cognitive intelligence, which people actually really kind of poo-poo on at the modern world. You've got perseverance, which has been remarketed as grit. And then you have this hungry mind, which is curiosity. Now, what's really interesting about those 3 is that we know that the more curious kids are in prepubescent, 7, 8, 9, you follow them 17 years later, the more intelligent they become later. But there's no evidence the other way around. So, and we know this. Like, think about when you were in grade school and think about the most intelligent kids. They weren't necessarily curious. They were very good at solving problems. They were very good at knowing facts and winning trivia contests and Jeopardy, but they weren't necessarily curious about the world and other people. And there's no evidence for that. Now here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
So in terms of perseverance, a bunch of researchers asked, hey, if you were to reflect on the happiest days that you have, or the most curious moment you had over the past week, and then go on the treadmill or do these really difficult kind of Sudoku puzzles, what they found was that if you reflect on your most curious, intriguing moments, you would see about a 20% bump in your intellectual stamina and your physical stamina, even when you're working out. But for reflecting on when you're happy does not lead to more stamina. And the reason is simple. If you were to think about your happiest moment, right? Just imagine sitting on your surfboard, Venice Beach, you're laying on your back, the sun is shining on you, you caught an awesome wave, and you're just completely blissful. That doesn't motivate you to do anything new. It basically, you have this nostalgic moment and you want to sit back and drink a margarita and be like, yeah, that was a freaking awesome day. Like, I should have more of those days. Yeah. But when you reflect on when you were intrigued and you were hanging out with the guy that was riding a unicycle around you while you were like, hey, God, like, dude, when did you start getting into the unicycle? Like, of all the things to do, like, how does that start? And you had that conversation that motivates you to say, damn, the world is interesting. I want to find out more interesting things. I want to do more interesting things. And you have this approach motivation to take a step forward and do more that happens there. So being curious makes you persevere more towards your goals, but there's no evidence that being the really gritty, hardworking character makes you more curious. And so you put all this together, that the real catalyst of all these other psychological strengths starts from this place of, I want to explore, I'm intrigued by the world, I don't want to just be interesting. I want to take an interest in other people. You
Yeah.
attract other people, you attract new knowledge, you become wiser, you become stronger. So this is, I've been studying this for 25 years, and still I think we underappreciate curiosity because we kind of think about it in the educational spectrum, as opposed to this is how you get social capital. This is how you influence people. This is how you can be receptive to someone that thinks differently than you. And damn, is that cool, because at least 50% of the country has a very different belief system than you.
Wow. Well, and it's funny, like on this topic of curiosity, like I've even wrestled with changing the name of this podcast because understandably, like, it's supposed to be a play on words of people like, oh, well, I'm not a professional athlete. What am I doing on the show? I'm like, well, that's not exactly what this is about. But this theme of curiosity, like it's really got me thinking. And one of the questions I had for you is, so I look, I have a podcast, so I fall in this camp. Like I'm naturally just very curious. Like if I were to design my perfect day, it would probably be just constantly just reading and just like ingesting new information. And I see that with, my kids, actually the two that are kind of old enough to show, where their interests lie. Like they're both naturally very curious. And so the question I have for you is curiosity something that is innate, or, someone who's maybe listening to this podcast and they're like, well, I've always just kind of been focused on just like doing what I have to do every day, but boy, I'm interested in living a more fulfilling life. Is curiosity something that can kind of be like taught or, maybe, I don't know, strengthened?
Yeah. No, it's a good, and I like the analog you gave, right? People that are just like laser focused, like, listen, life's hard, trying to make ends meet, love seeing my kids, love having a romantic partner. Every once in a while I get time with my friends, not enough time that happens there. I don't have time to read books. I don't have times for podcasts.
Yeah.
I don't have time for TED Talks, even though they're 12 minutes.
Right.
So no judgment on that whatsoever. So what I want to offer here is most things have trade-offs, where if you invest in your friendships, that is time away from your kids, it's time away from working out, and it's time away from being at the beach, unless you mix all the things together.
Unless you can pull off all three. So that's actually
that's
terrible idea.
that's the dream activity. But yeah, try to organize schedules with people with kids.
Yeah, exactly.
So the interesting thing about curiosity is when you just this podcast interview with you right now. We never met before. I'm totally intrigued by you're bringing historical examples. So I am totally using a lot of cortical energy to try to engage with you and listen to you because I want to build off you.
Right.
What we find is after moments of curiosity, even though you use a lot of neurological activity, a lot of physical energy, you feel like at the end of this conversation, I'm going to have more energy to work out than when I started. And
Absolutely.
It doesn't make sense, because if you just ran a 10K and then went to your keyboard and started working on your journal, you'd be like, you know what? I think I'm going to take a nap. I need to rest for a little bit. But curiosity builds energy. So what I'm saying is this is like a free pass to fortitude and psychological nutriments. And even though you're using energy, it creates more energy. So this is something that's I almost think of it as, you could think of it as a psychological strength curiosity. You could think of it as we have moments when we're more curious than other moments, but you can also think of it as an approach to living, is that instead of going for the happy life of trying to have fun, instead of going for the meaningful life where I'm trying to do something that matters, you're saying, I want a life that's intriguing and interesting. And it might feel good. It might feel weird. It might feel negative, but damn, I'm going to have some good stories. I'm going to have a really good autobiography. And so it's an approach that you can start taking just as soon as you listen to this podcast, when you walk away in the next episode of your life. If there's a person there, you get to ask any question you want on the planet. And yet, invariably, we ask, how you doing? What was the weather? Yo, what are you doing this weekend? What did you do last weekend? Hey, any trips planned for the summer? And we just stick with this regular, lame.
I'm embarrassed as you say all this.
No, I do the same thing. No,
because I'm like, I think I just had that exact conversation last night.
Oh, I do the same thing all the time. And it's with intention. You can inject curiosity in. So just this morning, I drive my 15-year-old twin high school kid to school, and I just asked them. I'm like, hey, listen, is there any chance that you want to develop your rock climbing skills over the summer? Because I was just watching this video, dot, dot, dot. So I watched a video and I asked them if they want to be rock climbers. No segue whatsoever. And they were like, I don't know. One of my kids asked, is that going to help me be a better volleyball player? The other one said, I don't know if I'm strong enough to climb up the rock. So we had, all of a sudden, just by skipping the rungs of intimacy and asking this, not even that unusual of a question, I got to go into these different portals with each one of my kids in the car, as opposed to, do you have a test today? Like, hey, which friends are you going to see today? And so you can ask anything. And we are so, I'm including myself, we are all so goddamn boring in our initial conversations, and me included.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, I've had this conversation with my wife. I'm like, you know what? I don't know where this podcast is going to go long term. And for those listening, I think they know, like, I have like a full-time job and I've got 3 kids and I've even got a big side project I'm working on. But like, I love it so much. And the thing that I told her was like, when I walk away from a great conversation, I was like, I think I used the term, I was like, I am fired up. Like, I have so much energy. I'm excited. Like, everything that, happens in my day, like, it's a little bit easier to deal with. The counter is also true. Like, I was thinking about this, it's kind of like an interesting contradiction. Like, I love having a conversation like this. The older I get, I hate and avoid small talk. Like, you want to watch my eyes glaze over. It's like that conversation that you just laid out. I'm like, man, get me out of this situation.
Let's talk about
this. I'm like,
yeah.
But so I'm like, okay, I enjoy engaging with people. I'm not a complete curmudgeon hermit. But there's something about like, So it makes complete sense to me why curiosity is so important. You just get excited. It's like, oh wow, I didn't realize that. Oh, I didn't know that was possible. Or wait, they're doing what? Elon Musk started what company? It's just like, it's fun and it gets you excited about like the prospects of what's possible.
Can I give the listeners like a real simple tip? Because
please.
I mean, because I've been doing this for so long, and I want to make an easy runway to get into these curious conversations. People love talking about their past, and no one asks them about their past. So as we are adults, we meet people in their late 20s, 30s, 40s, and up. And we just kind of don't ask about what people were like in college or in high school. So just experiment with this of like when you go to your pool and when you meet people, and just be like, hey, by the way, I'm just curious. Do you think that we would have gotten along if we met in high school? And just watch where the conversation goes. Or like, hey, what were you like in college? So real simple questions about it does a couple things. One is, it opens up a number of avenues of where the conversation is going to go. You're not in control, and there's a lot of interesting things that could pop out. The second part is, you're also showing is that you care about their well-being because you've taken an interest in their past and who they are and their superhero origin story, that kind of, what made them them. And if they bring up difficult stuff, which often happens, all of us have our own adversities and traumas, is try to sit with it. Like, try not to fix it or change it, and just kind of just ask questions, as opposed to just saying that must have been hard for you. Of people are often remiss that no one asked them about their parent that died young. Of no one asked them that, that they were physically abused by their parents as a kid, or they were bullied, or that they failed out of high school, or they were homeless at one point, or they had a drug addiction at one point. So when someone brings this up, you can, with compassionate curiosity, you can start asking questions, and you don't have to stop and be like, damn, that sounds like you had a hard life. That's a conversation ender.
Right.
And instead be like, God, how'd you get to here from there?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such great advice. Well, and it's funny because on the one hand, and this almost ties back to like the softball example I gave at the beginning, you're kind of like, oh boy, that's kind of, maybe I should tread lightly. This might be hard for them. Right. And it's kind of like brings it full circle. It's like, no, like the people who take the time to like dive in, have a tough conversation, whether it be constructive criticism or being willing to like kind of peel back these layers and talk about something real. It's like, those are the people that you actually start to like form a bond with.
Yeah. No. Shared adversity. And you don't have to go through it together. But the idea that you are sitting and taking the perspective of the person who experienced adversity, or someone does it to you, is a very powerful elixir for fast charging friendships.
Yeah. Yeah. And thinking back to like the people that I engage with, that I walk away being like, oh, he's a great guy. They really are the ones who are fantastic at just asking questions and doing so in a way that seems like they have a genuine interest in learning more about you. And it's hard to do. And like, I understand why some people feel like a little hesitant to do it, but I mean, look, we're talking a lot about my personal life today, but sales, I mean, the best salespeople are the ones who talk the least, right? They are the ones who have found a way to like create rapport really quickly. And it's not through talking about the weather. And they're the ones who have figured out a way to listen and ask questions that, get people on the other side to come to a realization that maybe they couldn't even see. It's like, it truly is an art. And in my mind, something that can be built, but there's definitely people who are like just naturally gifted. But it seems like it's a skill set that can be acquired.
Yeah, and in the workplace, as opposed to you touting your new idea of, hey, does anyone have any half-formed, half-baked thoughts of like kind of like how we can do things better? You open up with those questions, and you've basically given people freedom of, you don't have to have a finished process to get to me. And you don't have to wait until you've worked out all the kinks, because you're basically saying, this is a space where we are going to help tinker and build off of your initial idea. And those kind of environments, those psychologically flexible environments, are going to innovate more. They do innovate more than ones where, you know what, don't challenge an idea unless you have a solution. That's one toxic problem. The other one is, don't give an idea unless it's fully developed. That's a second toxic problem. We're not even talking about toxic people here. And then when it comes to dating, if I was to rewrite Neil Strauss, is he write the game? Is he the one that wrote?
Oh, I don't know. I'll have to look. I'll definitely check.
Yeah,
someone's screaming in their headphones right now. I'll be like, it's not Neil Strauss.
Yeah. So he he wrote that game about being a pickup artist. And if I was to rewrite that, it would kind of go, Ken, with what you're saying is, this is how the greatest seducers are not talking about their own lives. They're finding like what's intriguing about the other person. And yet we have this anxious leaning of like, I have to show that I am better than all the other suitors that are available. And I wish like my 16-year-old self had this book that I wrote. I mean, I wrote this book because I thought to myself, so I didn't have a father figure growing up, which we don't have to psychoanalyze myself. I was raised by a single mom. I wrote this book of, I wish I had this guidebook for how to create a more fulfilling utopian life for myself and other people, because I didn't have the adult role models that were there. Yeah. And it's sort of my gift of this is 25 years of studying well-being, of like, here's the guide. And these, these strategies of trying to entice other people to tell their stories and getting genuinely interested. That's a strategy that I didn't use when I was younger. I just try to go on cool adventures and make sure that everyone knew that I went on these cool adventures. And people might have been impressed, but they didn't necessarily want to hang out with me a second time.
Right. For me, the most like common example is often, and look, I'm very much in this camp, unfortunately. I wish I wasn't. But when I introduce myself, I'm often so focused on making sure that I do something as simple as say my own name right that I don't catch theirs. Or I was so worried about my initial, it's so easy to get caught up in like, well, am I putting my best foot forward in terms of how I'm presenting myself?
Yeah.
That you can just be completely oblivious to what's happening on the other side. And the end result is the other person's like, well, this guy doesn't know anything about me, or isn't interested, or is so caught up in himself. So this is wonderful advice. Well, and I'll ask you too. So you mentioned, growing up in a household without a father figure, and you've now focused on like wellness and well-being for the last 25 years. Like for you, what have been the most impactful changes that maybe you've made over the course of like all of your research that have hopefully led to like a fulfilling life?
I mean, I think the most important thing is allowing for no allergic reaction to uncomfortable emotional experiences. And this is something that's challenging, particularly for boys and for men, is we're really trained of anger is this really socially acceptable response when underneath it is often like anxiety and fear that I'm not living up to my standards, fear that I'm going to be rejected, fear I'm not going to live up to other people's standards, or sadness that that I've lost a friendship, or a friendship is sort of dissipated, or you get injured and you can't play a sport anymore. So now your identity's changed because you're really tied
Oh
to
man.
the cheers, and or just be able to get into the arena. And now, like, what's your new arena? And there's a sadness there.
Mm.
So often, we turn to substances, and we turn to aggressiveness, and we turn to really obsessively, in a bad way, go into the weight room, not just to build our body, but to escape our own unwanted thoughts, feelings, and sensations. So I've gotten
Yeah.
really comfortable of crying. I've gotten really comfortable about being, wallowing in sadness, and just letting myself kind of have this space of, like, like, I'm just not in a good space right now. And also getting really good at telling people. So, all those, as opposed to just being a supportive friend, is letting people in so they can support me, because people want to. Your friends want
Right.
to be there. And listen, this is not a very typical masculine conversation, even still, because the cultural script is, we are the sentinels as boys and men, and we are
Mm.
to protect our families, we're to protect our friends, and we're there to be, in combat. If someone pulls a broken, serrated, like a glass bottle of beer, we're the one that's supposed to stand in front of our friend and take the blow for them. And that's a beautiful thing. But let's
Yeah.
not forget the softer side as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. And it's funny. It kind of coincides with like this, if listeners are still listening, like this emotional journey that I've kind of been on the last 5 years. I think being a parent has kind of brought a lot of that out. But you hit the nail on the head. And as someone else who's a male, and I'm from the outside, I probably look like a very typical, like, masculine caricature. Yeah, it's like, you grow up thinking the right way to handle this stuff is just to, like, persevere. And I would be described as someone who was, like, gritty. In a sick way, I'd almost be like, boy, I would love to get thrown into, like, that situation to see how I could, like,
I'm
respond and,
just
like,
like you.
come out of it. Yeah. But I've now having a wife who loves me very much, and we depend upon each other, and having kids, I was like, whoa, there's a lot of emotional stuff here that I have, like, completely not addressed. And now that I have all these other little people that, depend on me, it's like you start to see the need to, like, I need to unpack some of this stuff, and I need to learn to deal with it in a way that is healthier, so that in turn, my biggest fear was like, am I passing on my bad habits to them for lack of, like, not being willing to, like, do what's difficult to put in the
Yeah.
work?
Yeah.
That was like the big eye opener for me. And so I don't know. I mean, I'm still in the midst of it, but it's very cool to hear that, like, for you, as someone who's, like, focused on understanding all the aspects of well-being, that, like, that was, maybe the most important thing.
There's a lot in there that you're saying. One that I want to hit, because I have
Yeah.
a feeling that some of your listeners might be the same way. I look like a very masculine man, and I've always been
Right.
very muscular and fit. And people make all these assumptions. It's just like, people assume that attractive women are not going to read Dostoevsky. People assume that
Mm.
a physically, whatever, intimidating man is automatically like a meathead. And
Right. Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
and even when this book came out, I remember I did this live event, and after it was over, it was one of the greatest compliments. The woman in charge was like, you know what? Well, I thought you were like this alpha male who was just trying to, dominate everyone, and you're freaking softy and gushy inside, and you have so much love for humanity, and and it was a compliment, but at the same time, I'm like, damn, I'm 48 years old, and still with
Fighting
a
that
48-year-old
perception.
body, like, still, like, people assume that I'm gonna be, I don't know, just come in there like with guns blazing and just start attacking people and being sarcastic and obnoxious and kind of taking up all the space in the room. And yeah, no, I don't. It's cool, like, that the loving side is now kind of getting some attention, but it sucks when, for anyone, where your physical demeanor, people interpret is that I can tell your personality by physically how you walk through the world.
Oh yeah. We can wrap this up here. I know I've taken up a lot of your time, but it's funny. in college. So I went to Princeton, I went to Ivy League school, but I come from like a small, relatively small town north of Seattle, really almost closer to Canada than anything else. Right. So like huge cultural departure from what I grew up in. Like the town next door, their team was the Loggers, if that puts anything in perspective for people. And I remember, you know, I had to stop, and I think I read some study in one of my psych classes about like the impact it has on an athlete's performance when they get reminded that they're an athlete before a test. And I found that I was constantly fighting this perception in my own head, probably, and probably some in theirs too, if we're being honest, but like of being like, oh, well, here's the jock in the room. He probably wouldn't be here without football, which, you know, granted, probably true. But you know, it's like I had to stop wearing like my football sweats and gear to take tests. Like I had to make a conscious decision. I was like, man, I need to like stop reminding myself that I'm like the football player here taking the test, and I'm just like a student like everyone else.
Right.
Because it's like, man, you can get caught up in that perception, right or wrong, of what you think people are or what people think of you. And it can really impact the way that like you perform and the way that you carry yourself. I really had to make that change because I was like, oh God, my self-talk during this, you know, precept where I'm supposed to be like sharing ideas about the reading from this week. I was just so hesitant.
I love your self-awareness to like little nudges to the environment. It's really good for, you know, just to kind of give these examples of like that slight nudge of I'm going to wear the glasses and I'm going to wear like the button down shirt because in that I feel nerdy. And right now I want the nerdy version of myself to come out in this situation. And so there's nothing, it's bizarre, but it's functional. And we should think about like psychological flexibility. What is the functional strategy? Small, effortless strategy. If that gives you, you know, a 5% bump on a test, well, shoot, test after test after test, man, that cumulative benefit ends up being huge.
Right. Oh man. Todd, this has been such an awesome conversation. I really hope the listeners enjoy it. And like I said, I must have had like 30 questions for you. I think we hit like 2 of them, and then everything else was just genuine interest. But this is so wonderful, and I would love to have you back on at some point. But for those who want to learn more about your doing, we already mentioned your book, The Art of Insubordination: How to Dissent and Defy Effectively. I highly recommend it. For people who want to learn more about you, where can I direct them?
Just go to my website, toddkashdan.com. I got a free newsletter, sign up. And I just like to share alternative views of conventional practices because there's a lot of messed up stuff happening in our society. And I am perfectly comfortable being provocative because I have tenure and speaking my piece.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much. And again, we'll have to have you back on in the future if you're up for it.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, this is great.
Awesome.